morning. Before I start my official remarks, I'm going to digress just for a minute and recognize what's going on around the world. And I don't want to make people uncomfortable, but I realize as an American going overseas, presenting at conferences, there are other Americans that are in this room, kind of acknowledging the reality of what we are dealing with today is important. The last time I was in Scandinavia, I spoke at Uppsala University in 2003, which may predate the birth of some of you in here. It was at University of Tartu at the time. And I remember when I was in Estonia, this was after 9/11, there was a lot of recognition of what the United States had experienced and the world had experienced in September 2001. Now, 22 years later, we are experiencing something very different than that. And it is, I would say, amazing, disturbing, troubling that decisions that come from one person, one administration, can really upset the world order. We have to recognize that so much is going on, so much turbulence. Much of my work focuses on international development and conflict resolution. And as many of you in this room are graduate students dealing with the challenges of being graduate students, I sit in Washington, D.C., in a program where many of my students aspire to do global peace building and to work for agencies like USAID. I want to start by apologizing on behalf of the American people, or at least half of the American people. I don't know if I'm representing you, but I think to acknowledge often Americans traveled overseas with a sense of hubris. That's not the case now. So humility, for sure, and recognizing what we're dealing with, and that it is upsetting and challenging everyone in this room, some in ways you might not even recognize. I was at the Nobel Museum in Stockholm last week, and I was struck by going to the museum and the advancements that have taken place. But what struck me also is that Americans might not be participating and might not have the Nobel laureates, particularly in the sciences, because grants are being decimated in the sciences of the United States. And I am a Fulbright scholar, and the entire US Fulbright Scholarship Board resigned yesterday. And apparently there were recommendations made by the Norwegian Fulbright Commission for Fulbright grantees that were changed by the US State Department. So much going on. It's really hard to focus on one particular thing, but there's interest of things that I'm interested in. So while I apologize, I ask for everyone's help. I ask for you to recognize the things that are happening in the United States that I want to say didn't happen, but are happening nonetheless. We have to acknowledge what's going on. This week, we're dealing with the bookends of upset, disturbance, nonviolent protest that's being perceived differently in Los Angeles. At the same time, on Saturday, I'm glad to be in Scandinavia on Saturday, where we're going to have the first time in many, many years a military parade in Washington. I come from Washington, D.C. I was very pleased and very happy that we celebrated World Pride in Washington this year. That was a breath of fresh air. That was wonderful to see that. So looking for the positive things that are going on in America is really important right now. But let's not fool ourselves. There's work to be done, and it's going to be challenging. Hopefully, we're all in this together, even those of you who are not in the peace and conflict field, such as myself. Those of you who are in fields that really we're all trying to make a better world. We're trying to connect people with each other. We're trying to create peace and global understanding. We need to continue to do that. But what this is going to bring is bring about more creativity than we've required in a long time. And I see a lot of creativity in this room. So the ways that we're going to be connecting with each other and working often to get around things and to continue to do the good work is going to be really important. So I thank you and I appreciate all that you're doing. And I look forward to continue to work with you. And, hope springs eternal. Hopefully things will improve over time. So thank you. Okay, let me talk a little bit about my work and the work of the Forage Center for Peacebuilding and Humanitarian Education. And I have this subtitle here, Fake It Till You Make It, with apologies to, let's see if I can advance this. This is not advancing.
It might be thinking.
It might be thinking.
The right arrow key.
And the right arrow key is not. Some reason it's not announced. There's always a workaround. And somebody who knows how to work with it. All right, now I'm going to go to the next one. With apologies to Simon. Fake it till you make it. One of the things that struck me about the work that I do and the work that I do in the Forage Center and the work that I do with experiential education, because we're all in the experiential education business. Sometimes you don't recognize that we are, is that often the process of engaging in something and participating in something that may or may not be enthusiastic about, but we enjoy, sometimes it's a bit uncomfortable, which is really essential to learning, actually transforms our identity. It transforms who we are, it transforms what we want to do. So this idea of faking till you make it, in a sense, really is kind of cutting to the core of at least in what I think is role playing, is that you're brought into a situation that you may or may not be enthusiastic about, but here you are. And through that process of doing it, it changes you in some way. So let's talk about that in the context of the work that I do. This is just a definition from actually this wonderful academic highbrow resource, Wikipedia. So just to let you know. This idea of faking it till you make it, if you think about it a little bit, if you think about the things that you've done, often there's some science behind that, but I won't go into that. Kind of where I start the work that I do is John Dewey. And I probably most of you in this room recognize who John Dewey is, the father of experiential education. And what Dewey would say is that it's experience with reflection that actually is the core of learning. This, in a sense, is anathema. We're doing PowerPoint. This is not the best way of learning, right? That's not what you do either, right? You learn by getting people to engage and to do things. I can't imagine the work that you do. Say, okay, we're going to sit for 2 hours and watch PowerPoint, and you're going to walk away and be transformed. This is necessary in conferences. But this idea of engaging and doing something changes who you are, particularly when you have the chance to sit on the outside and think about how that has happened to you. What we do in the Forage Center is this idea of role playing as a professional. That is, in a sense, what students do when they're coming into a situation where they're taking on an identity as a professional, an NGO member charged with being deployed to a conflict, a disaster situation where they have to accomplish certain ends. Then the opportunity to reflect on that afterwards, that's the transformation, developing and acquiring new skills and identity. So let me talk about the Forage Center a bit. So we're an American not-for-profit. We are based outside of Washington, D.C. We've been operating for 10 years, but the work we've been doing is 20 years long, based on a colleague named Paul Forge, who passed away about 10 years ago. And what he recognizes, and we recognize it, that there are many young people, and what I mean is maybe not young chronologically, but young educationally, graduate students, undergraduate students, who aspire to work in crises, to want to go work in South Sudan, to work for Médecins Sans Frontières, to work in a civil war, to go to Gaza, if you can go to Gaza right now, can't ask, can't get into Gaza, who want to do that, but really have no sense of what that is like. I mean, often the idealism that we have drives us to want to do something, but we really don't know the consequences of what that is. I don't know many of my graduate students who've had experience sleeping under mosquito netting and taking malaria pills for an extended time. And I wonder in this room if many of you have had that experience. That if you want to do this type of work, you're going to have to recognize that. So we realized that what we had to do is create something that created a pseudo experience, if you will, something that students could experience and could be in that space for a period of time as this worker with other people also role playing to accomplish certain needs. These are just photographs from our exercise. When we do some debriefing at the end, reflection. This is at our site. This is meeting with an NGO. I'm going to kind of go quickly through some of this. We also take our students at night. So one of the things, if you've done immersive experiences in a role-playing situation, if it's continuous the way this is continuous over 72 hours. Continuous does include 2 o'clock in the morning. And so students are not going to a hotel at night and checking back in. You're enrolled the entire period of time. In fact, we take students' cell phones away from them. They're incommunicado, which is really important for role playing. In a sense, to be in that space, and those of you who do LARP probably recognize you have to be in that space. The rest of the world has to be shut off. So that's important to us as well. Of course, in anything, there's a bit of exhaustion. There's just a little bit more about the Forage Center. We have the fellows. This is our board. One of the things that we recognize in the work that we do, and I'm going to go through kind of our exercise, is that the need for people to work in humanitarian conflicts has never been greater, right? There are some 165 million displaced people around the world, of which the majority are internally displaced, IDPs, versus refugees, versus those people who are seeking asylum. And we often kind of bring all these people together, migrating, often forced or migrating because of their own needs to someplace else. That number will continue. That number will balloon, explode probably over the coming years. And of course, as Europeans, you've been closely following both Gaza and Ukraine, recognizing the large numbers. I think 5 million people are displaced in Ukraine. Everyone is displaced in Gaza. And people who are displaced, if they're internally displaced, are displaced within their country borders. That's different than being a refugee when you cross a border. But many of those refugees end up in your communities. They find their way where you are, and they start new life where you are. And I would suggest maybe some of you are descendants of people who were forcibly displaced and developed. So the need is great, and the need will continue, we recognize. Notwithstanding what's going on around the world, notwithstanding the fact that the international development field, as from the standpoint of Americans, but really much of the world, has been completely undermined. That doesn't take away the need, which will continue, just is going to be harder to do the work. And humanitarian workers, those of you who know something about this, recognize to be a humanitarian worker, to work in a conflict zone is risky. It's always been risky, but there's a time in our history that in conflicts, people who were in the Red Cross were kind of protected. That changed during the Iraq conflict. We know stories of humanitarian workers suffering terrible consequences. And so we prepare students for that to the extent that we can. So we start with a country. So for those of you who do LARP, you start with something, right? You start with a world, a space, a place, a time, a period. You start with a country that we've created. It's called Costera. And this country is a country that is a former colonial country of British. It has a north-south divide between the affluent northerners, who are, for the most part, more militaristic and a right-of-center government, who are oppressing indigenous southerners, or southerners that kind of represent a different type of culture. There's a lot of detail on that. The map actually of the county in which we take place, because once again, we're situation-based. We take students somewhere physically on 40 acres of property in this county. And this is actually showing what's going on during the simulation with regard to movement. Like you all, the work that you do, it's complex. It's not like we throw people together and say, well, get at it, right? We have a dossier, we have a country, we have a background of the country. The students coming in need to know this. The NGOs that come in, they get interviewed. In fact, they're in the midst of interviews. Now they have to apply for a visa to come into the country virtually. That this year's program, which will start in 2 weeks, we have nearly 20 students from 6 different academic institutions in the United States and Canada and some internationals. And they all have to apply for a visa to get into Costero. And so they give them a form and they have to produce a photograph and they have to have interviews with immigration officers online before they come to the country. We're very restricted. You come into the country, you're going to cross the border. Some of them are not going to cross very easily. How many people have that experience? You don't cross very easily, right? Sometimes you say, oh, they're just waiting for them for an hour. So we do a little bit of that with them. So that when they get this look and feel of being somewhere else is really important. Visa application. So, right? Most of you in this room have completed a visa application. It's surprising how many American college students have not. Even those who aspire to do this type of work, percentage of Americans who have passports are higher than they were in the past, but they're still lower than internationals, particularly Europeans. So to apply for a visa in a country doesn't exist is a little bit unusual. Also, to fill out an information form. With this information form, actually part of it is a proof of life statement. I'm sure some of you may know what proof of life is. So if you're held hostage, there's a way of us identifying who you are. And we ask students to do that and to put information about that, and they're kind of struck by that, but this is to indicate that for the 3 days that you're at Costero, all might not be as safe as you think it's going to be. But this is kind of the most critical part of all this. It helps you understand the way we do things. And once again, not being familiar with LARP, I'm not sure if this matches up to your experiences, which is a question that I have, and I'm going to try to find out while I'm here, is that this is called a MESL, right? And it stands for Master Scenario List Events List. And it's a military term in the United States, where what happens is every half an hour, something is taking place. Students are divided into groups. Students don't see this, they don't know what's coming, but most of it are going to be meetings with NGOs. So we have NGOs that represent Red Cross type organizations, emergency management type organizations, military, police, LGBTQ advocacy groups, because in our role players, we have people who are IDPs who are representing the queer community. We have people in our role plays who are representing the autistic community. We have people in our role plays who bring pets with them. Because what we're trying to do is within the IDP population that is role playing itself, we're trying to reflect the full panoply of what people are when they're internally deceased. They bring their pets, they bring their identities. So this is a series of meetings that take place over that time, right? It's a little bit hard to understand, but once again, it recognizes what's going on. And one of the things that we recognize is probably the same with all experiential learning. You plan it out recognizing if we get 60 or 70% of this done, if it works the way we want it to work, we're succeeding. Right? Because that's what experiential learning is about for students. If I get this up and I want them to run this, but my students want to go into some sort of direction, they're running into to let them go there. That's what learning is about, provided there's a consequence to what that is. So quite often we have students that will kind of go off of things, notwithstanding this. Just some photographs from past exercises. You know, part of the exercise also is that when students come, those of you who've been deployed in different organizations, like I don't know how many people in this room have worked for NGOs and you've been deployed somewhere and you go somewhere and you go on mission. You show up and you're just not put in mission, you're going to do some in-country training. And you're going to learn the language. I can't do that in 3 days very quickly, but you're going to learn about the culture, you're going to learn about the protocols, you're going to learn about what's going on. This is what NGOs do, and this is what we do also. Students arriving, we're teaching them about the country. Their role as NGO workers, everyone that's presenting as country staff, we're going to teach you what we're doing. I've modeled a lot of this from the US Peace Corps, and some of you may be familiar with it, and that the training, that is, if you're deployed in the US Peace Corps and you go overseas, experience is usually 27 months, of which 24 months of it is actually in working in a school or a village or whatever, but several months of it is training, right? So that you can be acquired to the culture and the language of what's going on. These are role players. They're all role players, but the largest section of our role players, the exercise that we're running in 2 weeks will be 20 students who will come in from 5 or 6 different colleges. And then another 30, 40 role players who will play police, military, NGOs, et cetera. Most of them doing it for years. But then probably about 15, 20 of that group will be internally displaced people. Internally displaced people we pull from area colleges and universities. We actually have a very close relationship with the US Community College next door. And they always bring some students in. You are going to play this person under these circumstances. You're going to be asked these questions. We ask them to develop their own identity also. So this is a group that, this is from photograph here is from that group maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And, you know, we make things as realistic as we can. People are crossing a border. So we have a border crossing and there are police there. And we're trying to make this uncomfortable for people who've never experienced that. Once again, those of you who cross borders know this is no laughing matter, right? If you're crossing into a border of a country and in your passport, you've got something that says you've been into a country, right? If you're, for instance, if you're going into some countries and you have a stamp of a country that doesn't have diplomatic relations with that country, your visa, you're going to go sit and talk to people. When you're shaking your head, you've had that experience. That's why. For several years, we actually work with the military. We no longer work with the military. We found our exercise was getting a little bit too militaristic. We actually operated in Florida for probably the first period where we operated, and then we moved everything up to Maryland. The problem with the military is that they want to make it militaristic. We don't want to make it militaristic. We have a really humanistic, trust-building, collaborative, learning what's going on, supportive kind of experience where the military won't bring airsoft weapons and point them at people, and we didn't really feel comfortable doing it. But also it's traumatizing. You know, one of the things that we recognize when students come to this, and we have a lot of calls and forums and so forth, one of the things we want to know is that if you've been a displaced person before, if you've suffered some trauma, so sometimes people don't recognize they've suffered trauma. So I understand this is a difficult thing to ask. We want to know that because on staff, we have a social worker and we have a registered nurse. And we have had to pull people out of simulation. And I'm wondering if those of you who've done LARP have had to pull people out of a LARP because all of a sudden something's happening to them that they're recalling something that took place 20 years before that's causing some disturbance. We've had that happen. By militarizing, we're exacerbating that, making it worse. But every exercise, there's something that goes on with somebody that we need to pull them out of the exercise because we don't want to make the exercise destructive for them. Sense. There's our border. There's the Costarin flag. You know, and I think in role playing, like what we do is that we're trying to infuse students in different ways with different types of information. Different things are happening. There's a macro agenda, the micro agenda. Our agenda this year, we changed it drastically. We are an NGO called the Forage Corps based in New York that's been deployed to Costero. But we also lost 40% of our funding because we were funded by USAID. We're on the ropes financially, like a lot of NGOs are. There's been a lot of bad media. The Costerian government doesn't want to work with us because they think that we're not going to exist for much longer. The Costerian president actually is a militaristic president. He's been to Mar-a-Lago and he's friends with the current administration of the United States. So he has a different view of things. So we're trying to feed lots of information to students simultaneously, not just about what's going on, which is a wildfire and an internal conflict in the country, but all this macro information. And we do it easily by just producing a newspaper. This idea, well, why don't we using social media? And we can do that when we take their phones away from them. We give them walkie-talkies. It's a little bit hard. But really, what I find in newsprint is actually an opportunity for people to sit and deliberate and talk about it. Too often, I find communication is singular. It's directed to you, kind of a thing. But if I give 3 people a newspaper, they have to read it and share what's going on. That becomes important. We do have objectives. I'm not going to go through these in detail, but there's a field of humanitarian education in which we are part of. We're members of organizations and so forth. There are objectives you're trying to accomplish. Some of these are evaluated strictly. Some of them are evaluated in a more kind of aggregate way to see if students are accomplishing these things. We want students to walk away. And when students are finished with the experience, there's actually 1 or 2 things I find. One is I find students are saying, I didn't like this. This is hard for me. I don't think I can do this. I said, okay, you want to give it one? I said, God bless you, good yourself. Because this is important in humanitarian work. people are not prepared to do this, shouldn't do it. I have just as many students who will come to me and say, I felt empowered. I felt I could do this. I think that's, and the next thing I like to hear about them is that they've gotten a job with an NGO in South Sudan or Mindanao, or they're in the US Peace Corps, or they're in something. And they will come back and say, this 3-day experience allowed me the confidence level to do that. Just a few more slides. One of the objectives that we have for students is that they have to work out an agreement. They're coming in basically as a forwarding group that they're working out an agreement among all the NGOs. So it's a lot of negotiation because all the NGOs and the IDPs are looking for different things they're trying to accomplish. And this year, they're not even going to trust them because they're more. So they're going to have to work around that. This is one of our alum who actually ended up, after the experience working for Nonviolent Peace Force in South Sudan. I don't know if you know anything about civilian protection organizations. The civilian protection organizations are nonviolent ways in which organizations will protect people who are potentially subject to violence. And she worked for one in South Sudan. She also worked for NGOs in Lebanon. And she'll tell us, she was a student of mine at George Mason University, that she would not have gotten that job but for the 3-day experience that we gave, because she was able to articulate the things that she had as a role player into what the work that she would be doing overseas, and it clicked for the organizations applying for it, and they brought her on. But some lessons learned, and then I'll close it out. Costumes help a lot. Perfect be the enemy of the good. I think we learned that this morning, right? And I realize that also in experiential work is that sometimes we have this lofty way. We want everybody to kind of come out the same, maybe come out different, but the same. Things don't work out that well. We've already had a tech snafu in our own simulation this week. Actually, it has a Zoom link didn't work. I mean, all the things you just experienced today. You know, and that's learning, that's education. I mean, to be an educator is not to be a perfectionist. If you're a perfectionist and an educator, I have sympathy for you. To be an educator is to be flexible, to be adaptive, and to get our students to recognize to be flexible and adaptive is very important in life, right? If there's something in your way, you don't sit there and be frustrated, you figure out a way. This experience is when you're uncomfortable. That's important also, right? To be comfortable doesn't necessarily give you a learning experience. To be uncomfortable gives you learning. To be overly uncomfortable, maybe you're closed off. Students given the opportunity will rely on each other to find solutions. This is one of the other problems with learning, is that tactically too quickly want to jump in, right? Those of you who've been in the classroom, you see students like, you want to step in, step back. Let them figure it out. They will figure it out. Given time and energy and resources, students will figure it out. You don't have to be there. Camaraderie is better than building skills. At the end of the day, what I'm trying to do is I'm not teaching you skills. I'm teaching you to be comrades, to share, to trust, to build, to work as a team. That's more important than skill building. Young professionals can mentor other young professionals. What we do is that once you come into our program, we make you in charge of next year's program. Those of us who are the gray hairs, we're wanting to step back. And I have a certain vision of it, but I have exercise directors who are in their 20s this year. I'm not the exercise director, I'm president of the NGO. And they will say, David, we're going to do this. And I'm going to say, I'll do it. It's your exercise. I want you to do it. I mean, there are some times when I say, we can't do that because we can't afford it. I will tell them that. 26-year-olds don't necessarily understand the budget. But I will recognize that it's their exercise. Reflection and learning continue long after the experience. So those of you who've done LARP, don't you know, it's not like, oh, we're done now, I'm reflecting. It's 2 weeks later you're reflecting. It's 6 months later you're reflecting because something's happening. You're saying, oh, I remember when I did that, no, and now it makes sense to me. And costumes are always a good thing. I have a chapter in a book coming out in a couple of weeks. If you're interested in a little bit of self-promotion, it's coming out in a couple of weeks, couple of months. November, talks about experiences. I can give you more information about this. I'm asking this question to you all. Is this or could be LARP? I'm new to the LARP world. So what I want to find out is that what I am doing LARPish?
Do you call it LARP?
No.
Then no.
Right, we don't call it LARP. I've never used the word. In fact, I wasn't sure about what it is until I asked my 30-year-old son. He says, yeah, I know what LARP is. I'm thinking, well, tell me what it LARP is. And I went and read about it. And then this was early on when Sarah invited me. It's like, oh, okay. it seems like we're doing something like that, but are we really doing it? Maybe not. But I want to learn about it. This is why you come to conferences. Believe me, I may be telling you something that's new to you, but you're going to tell me a lot that's going to be new for me. And then tell you reach me. So thank you very much.
Please just stay there. We have time for a couple of questions.
Sure. Any questions? I will be around all day. So I will be in that empty seat at your table. Ask me a question. Yes,
I have a question.
Sarah.
I have many questions.
Okay.
But the one that I'm most interested in is, do they break character in the evening to debrief? They're debriefing in character.
They break character at the end of the 3 days.
Right.
So in the evening, for the first 2.5 days, they're continuous in character. Then they're deployed out of the country. And they know they're going to deploy out of the country. Then we bring them out of the simulation. And really, it's not like you turn it off. If you played a role for 2.5 days, it's not like you can turn it off. We actually go through a process of meditative reflecting, thinking of who you were, what you did, what you're trying to accomplish. Keep your eyes closed, wake up, you're back in wherever Costera, well, actually in Western Maryland, you're somewhere else. Then we're out of character, then we debrief.
But you have debriefing on the schedule, so that happens in character.
In character, so there's some debriefing in character that the country director shows up and said what's happening because it's their first deployment. So that it would be natural that the Forage Corps would do some debriefing in character with them while they're there. Question? Yes.
Consistency in how well it works? Is it like even level, or do you have like, oh, this thing was a star this year, and then the next year,
Well,
I didn't practice well this time, sort of?
Of course, everything is inconsistent. We also always do an after action report and talking about what happened. And often the weaknesses come from, well, we didn't get the best role players, or somebody didn't show up, or something traumatic happened to somebody, and so forth. It's pretty consistent. And what I find is that the anecdotal, observational discussions is what really tells me that it succeeded. Students will come to me 6 months later and said, Professor Smith, I got this job because of this. This is when I know it's a success. We do data. We wrote an article. You can see our data and all of that. Not always stellar. Sometimes it doesn't work the way you want to, but that's an objective opinion from my standpoint. I mean, a subjective opinion from my standpoint, whether it worked, right? Whether I think it worked, but the students feel it's worked. How many times have you been in front of a classroom and said, that was the terrible lecture, and everyone is rousing applause because it was wonderful that you gave it? You don't know. Questions? Yes. Sure.
Have you seen humanitarian groups use similar life action plans? And if not, have you tried getting others to adopt this?
Major organization, which is much larger than us, is the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative that's out of Harvard University. That's run mostly from a public health NGO standpoint. So they run something similar to this. But what they do is they bring students together that represent a group of NGOs that have been tasked into a country with a UN organizing agency, OCHA, which is Humanitarian Affairs United, kind of organizing this country that doesn't exist and doing something like this. We actually went up to visit the Harvard exercise a couple of years ago, and we found it very large. They had like 100 students. We don't want to do a 100-student program. We want to do 15 students because we debrief throughout. And what happens after every iteration, the exercise director and the role players get together and talk about what happened. And we get to know all 15 students really well. And we say, she's being excluded. How do we bring her back in? He's dominated. How do we put him aside? This isn't happening. There seems to be some learning. You can't do that with 150 students. At least I haven't done it. But 15 students, you can do this. Very tailored. Other questions? I know we're going over time, so thank you, and I will be around.